So I want to thank everyone for being here today. We are so lucky to have our great uh, team of mentors. I am thrilled that we have three amazing mentors who have all been a part of Get Connected Mentor Network for the last 4 years. And I like to think of these three mentors as a legend, a leader, and a pioneer. I mean, you can't get better than that. I want to welcome them, and I want to thank Eastern Bank and Quincy, who for the last, I would say, 5 years since we started this mentor program, they have specifically the sponsors of this, along with Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Typically, we are in Blue Cross Blue Shield, about 300 people and 30 mentors, but this is the new reality. And I want to just thank everyone for sticking with us as we pivot, not panic, and we move to internet and an online platform. So let me just say that for those of you who may be new to Get Connected is Boston's premier inclusive business networking event that brings together people of all cultural backgrounds for the purpose of making positive cross-cultural relationships. We have programs like this one, forums to help people grow their career and their businesses. And we also like to think that we are making our city and our state more welcoming and inclusive for everybody. So we thank you for those of you who have been a part of the network for 12 years. Thank you for doing that. Well, let me tell you about Evelyn Murphy. Evelyn Murphy is a legend. She was the first woman to hold constitutional office statewide in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. She has been for the last 3 or more decades working to really lift women up, ensure that women have equality in their wage. She has written a book on, how to get even, but not in the way you think. It's really about how women can level the playing field and get paid the same way their male counterparts do for doing the same work. She is founded the Wage Project, which is dedicated to helping women negotiate their, their pay, their salary. She holds a series of seminars and forums and is a co-chair of Mayor Walsh's Women Advancement and Women's Commission that looks into how we engage and elevate gender equality. She has also been at the forefront of equal pay, both here in the state and across the country. And a little known or unknown secret, Evelyn has been a wonderful mentor of mine for over 3 decades. And we just look like we are young ladies, which we are. I'm so lucky to have her as a mentor, and later on I'll share with you a great advice that she has given to me that I have found to be so useful. For those of you who remember my White Men Who Can Jump, Barry Bluestone is one of the honorees from 6 years ago. So is Bob Rivers of Eastern Bank. I watched Evelyn engage with men, businessmen, not only in her campaign, but to do things that they probably would not do without her prompting. And she taught me that you can wear an iron fist, but with a silk glove. And you can engage men to make positive changes, both to elevate women and people of color. And I have carried that with me for 30 years. So it's not coincidental that I have always believed that men, and in particular white men, can make the changes that we need in society and should. So thank you, Evelyn, for being my secret weapon and my mentor for 3 decades.
My pleasure.
And now we move on to Kathy Abbott, who is a leader in the nonprofit world. Kathy, when she was in college, believe it or not, this was a little thing I didn't know about her, but found out she was a park ranger. So you might ask, somebody go from being a park ranger to heading up one of the most important institutions in Boston, Boston Harbor now. Boston, as we know, is a coastal city. And there is so much to our harbor. We need to preserve it. We need to be able to go and visit the islands, which I have done at a couple of her fundraisers. And she has been in the Boston Business Journal Power 50 as one of the 50 most powerful leaders in Boston. And she does fabulous, wonderful work. And I have to say, she's one of the nonprofits who walk the walk in terms of diversity and inclusion at her staff level. She has every single group represented in that organization, which speaks to the fact that the harbor is inclusive and belongs to all of us. So I am delighted to have her here, and we're going to hear more from her. And our next leader, thank you, Kathy, is a pioneer. And he's a pioneer because he is the first African American to lead the largest and oldest mutual bank in the country. It's over 200 years. And he is a pioneer because he also was one of the, he did not become president of one bank, but he became president of 2 banks. And he was the president of Citizens Bank before joining Eastern Bank. And we are so much better for having Quincy Miller at Eastern Bank. He is very committed, like Eastern, to inclusion, equity, and diversity. He has also been very much an advisor of mine. And whenever I come up with my crazy ideas, like Evelyn Murphy, he says to me, okay, so how are you going to monetize this? He keeps me, he and Evelyn keep me. We know you are a good person. We know you like to do all this stuff, but how are you going to make money? So I appreciate that about Quincy, because then he forces me to think about it. And he's been such a great friend, such a great advisor. And I am lucky. And Boston is lucky to have Quincy Miller here as a leader. So thank you, Quincy. And now
Quincy, if I could add,
yes.
if I could, the ads with Big Poppy and with Doug Flutie are the best on TV. Love them. Doug Flutie was actually a student of mine way back in DC days. Thanks to Eastern Bank for all you do.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks obviously to Colette for all that Colette does. To make sure we get a chance to say thank you before we even get started here, Colette, for what you do for this city and so important.
Thank you, Quincy.
Yeah, let me just chime in on that, because I think you're the most underrated person in the city, Colette. When I watch what you've done over 30 years and what you're now doing, what you're doing around the COVID crisis is extraordinary. And the reason is you just keep wading into these things. You never assume for a minute that, you know, you need to be asked. You get in and you take the leadership role on. You do it extraordinarily well, and you do it with in an inclusive way. So, you know, thank you. Thanks for including me, all of us. But you set a table, even with the show today, of people that, you know, I feel very lucky to be included and to see this crowd, some of whom I haven't seen for a couple decades, but to know that we're all knitted together through you.
Get Connected is a phenomenal model, and Colette, you are Get Connected. So.
Thank you. I try to be the connector, and in a good way. And I want to say that thank you, Evelyn, for saying that, because I feel like I followed the advice of one of my sheroes, who is Shirley Chisholm. She said, if they don't have a seat for you at the table, bring your own folding chair. So,
and you do.
Folding chair. You don't have to be invited. When, you know, my dad used to say, if you see something that needs to be done, do it. Don't come if you can't fix it, don't complain about it. So I like to follow that advice.
Colette, if I may say, you don't come just with a folding chair, you come with your own throne.
Thank you.
Fine.
Well, I'm going to get into asking some questions about COVID, and I want to see from, and I think maybe I'll ask this question first of Quincy. Quincy, the pandemic has obviously taken a toll on the recovery, on the economy, as businesses and employers struggle to figure out, how are we going to make it? What mindset and business strategy advice can you give to help those of us who are wondering if we're going to have a job post-COVID or even now, and how are we going to, our businesses are going to survive this economic crisis?
Yeah, thanks, Colette. You know, I think I got asked this question for a news report a couple of weeks ago, and I guess I'm going to start with the end of that, which is my answer at the time was, and I'll talk about the challenges, the real challenges that we're facing. But my answer at the end of the interview was the best thing that Boston has going for it, and we were talking about small businesses in general, but this really goes for all businesses. But the best thing I said Boston has going for it is the small businesses in and around Boston are two things. One, they are relentlessly hopeful. And because of that hope, I think it is going to be the things that allows businesses to be able to survive this. But they're also relentless. But there's no doubt there are going to be plenty of businesses that fail. If you ran a business that was struggling before COVID, there's going to be really hard to come back from it. I read another article that talked about all the businesses that will no longer be here, the large businesses that will no longer be here. And you can Google it and just see, because I don't want to put any of them on the spot here for, this broadcast, but when you start reading about the context of why they think these large brands won't be here anymore, as where they were coming into COVID and now being able to survive this, it makes a lot of sense. So it's this dichotomy, and you said this while we were getting together, there's never anything that's been like COVID. Mm-hmm. And for many businesses, Eastern Bank is one. We had all kinds of disaster recovery. I mean, you think as a regulated industry as banking, we have disaster recovery plans. We have this plan and that plan. nothing had us prepared for this, and we're a large company. And so you think about the smaller you are, the harder it is to be able to come out of this. But what people are doing right now, what they've been doing is, we first went into this thinking, okay, it's going to be 30 or 60 days. And you're starting to see things begin to open back up. The governor's put together a plan. Businesses are thinking about how they're going to transform themselves. And that's really what the thought process has moved to now. It was first hunkered down. How do we make sure we preserve our longevity? And now it's beginning to say, how am I going to have to change my business model to be able to serve a different community that we're going to go back to? Because, tourism, we're talking about the Cape when we got started here, right? Tourism is not going to come back like a V-shaped recovery. I mean, there's people that are just going to be afraid to get on a plane. There's going to be people that are afraid to stay at a hotel. So how we have to, and then you think about all the businesses that support tourism in and around Massachusetts. How do you now have to reshape your business model? Those are the things that businesses really have to be considering at this moment as we think about the future, because there's still a lot of unknown that's out there.
Quincy, you are so on point and on target. Many businesses today have to think about how they are going to pivot. And I have to say that I've been blessed because I have people in my arsenal, some of whom are on this call, Mary Jo Meisner in particular, who are working to help my business pivot to, and my team, Mirav and Ariel, I want to thank them for their work in supporting us as we move into a new platform. And I actually think that this is something that we have been thinking about. We moved on it quickly, and we are going to expand and do more. But for companies that, you're right, that had been struggling before this, it's going to be difficult for them to either pivot or to come back from this. And my next question is going to go to Kathy. Kathy, I'm going to ask you, as a nonprofit, what are the things that corporations and nonprofit and foundations and philanthropists in this town can do to ensure that nonprofits like Boston Harbor now and small business like mine and others who are on this webinar can survive? What can they do? What are the things that they can, specific things that you would advise them that could and should do?
Well, I think what we're finding that they are doing, which is incredibly encouraging, is that they are not abandoning us. They're not walking away. They're staying focused on what the point of the work is. It might be a pivot. For instance, tourism is a great example, and we're in that business too because of the park side of what we do. Third largest contributor to the state's GDP. Yeah, we're not going to have people flying in anytime soon, we don't think. Or necessarily flocking to our hotels, but we've still got 6.5, almost 7 million people in Massachusetts who want to get out and who want to do things in a safe way under the current circumstances. So how do we shift and stay focused on those folks? How do we focus in on our audiences? And so what we're finding is that the foundations, the philanthropists, the corporations, they're not leaving, they're not abandoning, they're continuing to contribute. They might be contributing a little bit less, but we're all having to tighten our belts in this situation. At Boston Harbor now, we've contracted our budget by almost 40%, I think, and really just honed in on the absolute bare minimum that we can get done. But that still is relying on a considerable amount of philanthropy from those sources, and it's still there. And I think the small businesses, it's the same thing. It's don't lose sight of what it is you're in the business to do, or the change you're trying to make, right? And whether you're looking at the giant cracks that the pandemic is exposing, which gives me great hope that we might finally fix some of those cracks, or whether it's those little individual steps that we're each taking in terms of who we're hiring, who we're serving, and how we're trying to do our work, that I'm finding people are finding great comfort in continuing to invest in those things.
Really good, good response, because I believe that whenever there is a crisis, whenever there is challenges, the innovators, the leaders, the people who can really quickly see, as you say, the cracks and figure out where are the gaps and how can I fit in and be a part of that solution are the ones that are going to survive. And I think you're absolutely right. We were talking earlier before we opened it up that I feel very lucky that several of Get Connected's corporate partners have re-upped and have continued to support us so we can continue to do this work.
Yeah.
I'm going to give the next question to Evelyn because I want to ask you, Ev, since you do a lot of work with women and with people of color around diversity, equity, and inclusion, I want to ask you, what should companies be doing to ensure that they stay true to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that they just don't close the door or let it fall off the table because they're now in a crisis? So we can't, that's a put on hold. What should they be doing?
Well, it's interesting, Colette, because we were talking about this before this started, and Quincy in particular was commenting on, it's easy and safe to say we're just going to wait this out and we need to cut back and we need to see what's going to emerge as the new normal and all that stuff. But if we let that happen, I think the old biases, the old discriminations for people of color, for women, the whole thing, are just going to be embedded once again in the new kind of workplace, whether that's now more remote or not. But we need to get ahead of this. And I think we get ahead of it with leaning on some of the corporate leaders, the CEOs in this community, who can speak out now and talk about the importance of keeping diversity, inclusion, and equity in the forefront and how they're doing that. There's nothing like explaining to others what they're doing, because it's credible. It's not just talking and conceptual. So to me, I would love to see a dozen, half dozen, whatever, corporate leaders stand up and start to talk publicly and consistently. It's sort of like I watch Andrew Cuomo's daily critiques on what's happening in New York State. I would love to see, not, I guess, asking for daily comments by CEOs would be too much, but very systematic addressing of this in a public forum so that we begin to pull the others along and begin to appreciate what advances can be made as we come out of this. But to me, that's around the corporate leadership in the state. And some, I mean, Quincy, you're one of them. Some of you are already doing this, but I would want it to be more visible so that everyone else can see it and can model their behavior and their thinking around how you're looking at it.
Well, I love that, because this might just be the opportunity to reconvene my white men who can jump. Talk about what can be done to really, get Bob Rivers, Barry Bluestone, the head of the feds here, Eric, and Alan, and a number, Steve Grossman, who is now running ICIC. And these are among some of our best thinkers and doers, and to have them really, so that you have just given me an idea, and I back about this. So we'll get it going. Thank you. Spot on. I'm going to ask Quincy. Quincy, one of the intriguing questions that people are always wanting to know is, how did you get this position? Not just once, but twice.
Yeah, do tell.
Black guy, you know, grew up in the projects, and you are now leading the oldest and largest mutual in the country. And before that, you led another bank. So tell us your secret.
Well, thanks, Colette. Well, I have to admit, I tell this all the time. I mean, there's no part of me that ever thought I was going to be sitting here as the president of Eastern Bank. That was never in my sort of mindset growing up. I talked to a lot of kids in and around Boston, and I tell them, just like many of them, I wanted to be an NFL football player, and I happened to be good at football, which was able to get me a scholarship to college. Now, again, I talk a lot about not putting all your eggs in one basket like I did. I was a good student. I wasn't a great student, but I was a good enough student to get into a school called Lafayette, which was, happened to be a really great college. And it was really in college that I learned and started to build some confidence in myself, but it took a little while. And so, when people ask sort of how did I get here, I talk a little bit about that path. I talk a little bit about an experience in college that I had working construction one summer. And it was the first time in my life that I knew what financial freedom felt like, because I was a 21-year-old college student making $25 an hour 25 years ago. I was rich, and that feeling was what motivated me, and that I think back to that time, and that's really what continues to drive me to this day. And so, but when I tell people, when I graduated college, my goal was to be a successful branch manager. That was literally the goal that I set for myself. And my first job out of college, I was the assistant branch manager. And I made more money in that first job out of college than my mother had ever made in her entire life, after working 25 years at the same company. And that was something, again, for many on this panel here, and our audience, a college education was able to do for me. And so from that point on, I just got here. Really, the last sort of piece I'd give into sort of how I got to be president was one of the pieces of advice that I got, and I share this every year during these Get Connected mentoring sessions, is I went through a management training program, and one of the senior leaders at the time said, you may be lucky enough to have a mentor, like happens through these sessions, but if you wait for a mentor, you could get left behind. And I think particularly for women and people of color, that is something that is priceless feedback. And that's really sort of how I built my role in this career that I've had in banking this whole time is, I'm ultra competitive. So I'm always trying to be the best at what I am. And I took that to heart. And so when I was assistant manager, I worked to be the top assistant manager. And I asked, what's it going to take to become a branch manager? And I ended up becoming a branch manager 12 months out of college. So I had reached that goal that I had. And then 6 months later, I ended up getting a regional manager job and running 15 branches. And then that just continued to snowball. And I would get a job. I'd learn that job. I'd work to be the best at it. I'd ask my manager a lot about what I needed to do to get better. That probably came from my years of athletics, of knowing continuous improvement was important. And then I just kept asking for the next job as I proved myself. And, here 20 plus years later, 23 years later in banking, I sit as the president at Eastern Bank. And I followed that path since the day I joined the industry.
Thank you, Quincy. That is a great segue to Kathy. And I am sure that, Kathy, you did not think you would be running one of the most important nonprofit organizations in the state of Massachusetts when you were working during college in the summer as a park ranger. So I would love to hear from you. what are some of the common career paths in this field?
In nonprofit management?
Yes.
I'm not sure there is one, right? I mean, I think we all come into nonprofits from other places usually. I think that may be changing now that there are far more people employed in nonprofits, but I know I originally came out of government. I work with a lot of people who come out of the private sector. I think the thing that has really driven me over the years in whatever sector I was working in has been seeing a problem, which is also always an opportunity, right? As our current COVID crisis we've described. And then, you know, leaning in as has been talked about, and pursuing the solution to that problem and solving that problem. And that's in the nonprofit world, particularly in the last decade or two, as it's really blossomed. You see an issue in the world and society that you think needs to be addressed. And then, you know, just as you created Get Connected, we go and we create things to fix those problems, or Evelyn's Wage Project, or Boston Harbor Now. That's one of the beautiful things about the nonprofit sector, and the thing that keeps drawing me back into it and into leadership roles in a whole variety of different in different fields really has been, it's that, you know, you're driven by the kind of disciplines and the needs and the issues that help to drive business, but you've got that mission that's driving you, that really it's the heart of the whole thing, and it's the combination of those two things. So there's not a direct path. I certainly haven't been on one. I've bounced from government to higher education, back into starting up a nonprofit, back into government, to creating a state park system, back into nonprofit to help advocate for increased funding for things. I mean, it's really, there's not a straight line anymore, I don't think. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. So you can really be guided. And I always tell folks who are starting out, follow your heart. If you identify things that you're passionate about, you will be able to invest yourself in those things, and you will be successful.
Well, thank you, Kathy. I think you are so right, because often people think that they cannot transfer skills that they may have in one industry to another. And I think that's very, very wrong. You can transfer skills. I was told many moons ago when I worked in nonprofit that it was going to be very difficult to make the transition from nonprofit into for-profit. And that was one of the easiest transition. I got the job I went after. I went from working for a nonprofit to heading up PR for Cablevision, which is now Comcast today.
Wow.
So I didn't find it difficult. I think if you have the passion, you have the vision, the values, and you believe in yourself, you can make that transition. And so I want to encourage people who might be on this call that if you are thinking about making a change, this might be the time for you to pivot. Don't panic, pivot, and think about where your passion is and your values and what it is you really want to be doing. So I encourage you to do that. My next question is to Evelyn. And I'm going to ask Ev, what is the biggest factor that has helped you to be successful? Because you didn't just break the barrier and shatter the ceiling. You kind of took a jackhammer and went right through the cement ceiling. It was over 200 years, and a woman had never won constitutional statewide office in the state of Massachusetts. So tell me, what were the factors that help you to be successful, not just in politics, because you have also been a businesswoman, and a board member on a number of corporations. So tell me, I share them with everybody because I'm your mentee.
Well, you know what's striking me about both Quincy and Kathy is that there are lots of similar patterns here among the three of us, and so to me, I've always one of the reasons I could break that barrier in elective politics in Massachusetts was that I've always worked very hard. I just take it as I am structured to do 60, 80-hour work weeks. That's what I've done all of my life. And I always assumed I could outwork people. And yet also the theme about education, because my dad graduated from the 8th grade and my mother from high school. I always figured at some time in my life, I would be supporting the family. And like Quincy, by the time I got out of school, I earned more money than my father ever did. And so that was it was hard. It was hard for him with his pride, but it was also the reality of what a good education could do for you and giving you the opportunities and the connections for going ahead. And it gave me the self-confidence. The other theme I think here is I'm not only competitive, but I am very athletic as well. I run 4 miles a day. I still do that. And I really believe, particularly for women, that if you're going to exude strength and stamina, you got to be in pretty good physical shape to do it a lot of the time. So I value that discipline of making sure that I get exercise and keep my body strong so I could go out and campaign or do whatever job. And then Kathy's theme. I mean, I've led the most crooked career development of any of us, only because I'm older than the rest of you. But it has been from the nonprofit sector to the state government. I discovered I love state government. It was when we all got thrown out the first time the Dukakis was thrown out of office that I looked around and decided that I was as smart as anybody who had gotten elected. So that's when I set out in my early 40s to go get elected. I had never been elected to anything in my adult life, and I was so green and pretty stupid about it, but learned it all. Had a great campaign manager, found a team, including you, Colette, who helped me through those years, and built this army of people who got excited and wanted to do the same thing. So to me, it's sort of, how do you gather your team of supporters? You work very hard. And after I got elected to the private sector, going into seeing what the corporate world is all about, then deciding, my real passion is around, because it's hard for me and for my family, seeing women get paid like men. And so that has been the driving force for me for the last 15, 20 years. And even there, learning from all of this, my initial thesis in the book that you mentioned was that women have to act to get employers to react. And that the only way women through the 90s and early 2000s acted was to litigate. And that's a career ender for most women. So learning how to get paid fairly by learning the skills of salary negotiation, which aren't very complicated. And in the process, when you know how to negotiate wisely and objectively, you find your voice and you get far more able to advocate for yourself and self-assured because you know the principles of it. So for me, this has been, and now I've discovered that it's not just women having to act to get employers to react, but that employers have got to be more transparent about what we're paying people and lead the way. And Bob, Quincy, you all are leading the way in being fearless about saying we need to be more transparent on salaries. And so I find this constantly moving issues, developing issues like wage equity. And for me, the civil rights movement was when I first started working, was all around basically getting development and rebuilding the cities, the then ghettos of the country, rebuilding them. So those have been the two themes for me all of my life, civil rights and women's rights. And I just keep reinventing where I can make a difference. And by the way, through all of this, I think mentors are important, sponsors are important. Deep down in your heart, you have to enjoy what you're doing. You have to have fun at it. You have to find the people that are going to make it fun and that are going to be supportive. And so that the journey is not a fight, but it's really embracing all of your friends and moving all together. And that to me is the magic of it.
You are so right. And I have to say, too, that there are two things that I want to mention about you, Ev. You, which when the history books are written, you were one of the first politician, if not the first, to have held a major first-time integrated fundraiser, because before, fundraising was done in silos. You do the people of color or the Black fundraiser or the Asian, the Chinese in the Chinatown, or the Latino. You had a major fundraiser at the home of Cheryl Marshall, where people's jaws were on the floor because they had never seen that kind of diversity for a mainstream politician. So you broke that. And secondly, you brought women together for the first time. And I remember the single largest fundraiser held by women for a woman was held by a group of women who came together to raise money for you. At the time, it was over $500,000 that was raised in that fundraiser, which had never been done before. It was Carol
Carol,
and Dawn Marie Driscoll and Cheryl Marshall, myself, and a number of other women, Dorothy Terrell, who all came together. And you always had inclusion at the core of the people who surrounded you. That's how I met Cheryl Homer. She worked for you.
Yeah.
And, you always did that. And I don't think people know that. And I found out why and how, because you worked with Black women back in the 60s and 70s in the Midwest, in Detroit. And
exactly right. But they were my heroines. Maddie Myers in Detroit, Hannah Bullock in Racine, Wisconsin. Those were the women who were my idols. Strong Black women, and I couldn't find any white women that matched them. They were spectacular. But Colette, while you're on that, I mean, the interesting thing about that theme is that it continues to this day. It was the fundraiser that you and I sponsored for Stacey Abrams that was magical again, because it was Black and white women together creating a huge fundraiser for affordable mixed. There's a magic here, but it has to be intentional. And you just keep doing it over decades to make it add up and get accepted in the culture.
I agree, and I thank you for that. I'm going to ask, my next question is to Quincy. And I want to ask you this, Quincy, in an era when certainly we see CEOs and maybe not so much now because it's so, paying themselves really big salaries. And there was talk about when we did the bailout 12 years ago, how some of the companies, paid their CEOs and put the money back instead of really building up their employees. And I want to ask you this. How important is it to work for a company whose values are aligned with your own? And it might mean that you take less pay, but that you are much happier, or are you much happier doing that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think that really comes down to, each individual. And because there's a couple pieces that you talked about. One is working with a company whose values are aligned with your own. Another is, working for a company where you feel good about the role, the job you have. And those two things aren't always completely aligned, right? I mean, again, I work in an industry that by its nature is not diverse. The financial institution industry is not diverse outside of retail banking. Now, guess where I started my career? In retail banking, because, you know, if you're a person of color, you can start in the branch. But, you know, my reason for coming to Eastern, so many people would ask me, you know, after such a successful career at, you know, former institutions, you know, why did I make the switch? And the answer was, and again, this isn't against any of those institutions, because I had a great career. But, you know, I was the only person of color in the top 100 leaders. I mean, I can count the other people in 7 years on probably one hand. And so that was, you know, I had to make the choice, because this was the industry that I was in. Was I going to be able to work with it in that structure or not? And so I found other ways, even though I liked everything else about the organization and the industry, I found other ways to stay connected, from my nonprofit work to add value. Obviously, I advocated internally. But one of the things that really created the opportunity with Eastern, when I had the chance to really get to know more about Eastern beyond Bob Rivers, who's a CEO, and I've known my entire career, as I got to spend time with our board of directors, who at the time, Wendell Knox, who was African-American man, former president or CEO of Abbott Technology, and then got to talk to who was ultimately going to be his successor on the board as the board chair, Deborah Jackson, who, again, African-American woman, head of Cambridge College. I had that experience. And then, you know, and this happened afterwards, but I'll tell you, when I was first recognized by Get Connected as, in that first year, I had just joined the bank, Colette, when you had your GK 100 for the first time. And I'll never forget Bob Rivers standing up there as helping the co-host and talking about how, together with you and others throughout Boston, of that GK 100, we had like 30 of the 100 were on our board in one way, shape, or fashion. And so I'll tell you, you know, having spent my whole career, you know, 25 years before I got to Eastern, what I appreciate now being at Eastern is what I have always wanted. And that's what it was fulfilling to me personally. Now, again, you know, that wasn't available to me in the industry where I started. I've only been in Boston for 11 or 12 years, and Eastern's fairly unique. The good news is, as you look at corporate America today, it still has a long way to go, but it's not like corporate America that I came into 25 years ago. There are companies, and you talk about them all the time, that are woke, that understand the importance of diversity. And so I think now for professionals, they have more of a choice to not have to live within an organization that doesn't share your values. I'll just, you know, one final story. I was presenting at another event, and a young man sort of raised his hand and said, you know, how do I get my company to appreciate that I'm LGBTQ? And, you know, and he talked about the fact that he loves his company, but it's difficult for him to be his full authentic self. And, you know, my answer was, there's enough companies now that are out there that you don't have to stand for that. You can make a choice to be with a company that is going to be supportive of you. And, you know, after that event, I gave him my card. You know, the young man sent me an email and said, I'd love to have lunch with you. I took the time to have lunch with them and talk to him a little about his career in analytics. And, you know, I still have his card, and I have an opportunity I'm thinking about for him as I expand one of my teams. So that's a perfect way of networking, of putting yourself out there and asking for it. But I think that's really the opportunity that we have, is there's just more companies that are connected. There's not enough, but you know, you don't have to stand for it anymore, maybe like I did for a lot of my career.
Thank you for sharing that. That is so very true. And I am going to ask a question of all three of you, starting with Kathy. Kathy, what keeps you up at night?
Wow. Well, I think it's changed since COVID, and I don't think it's just the anxiety created by the virus. But I think in the big scheme of things, we started this in the beginning of this conversation talking about the cracks that COVID has exposed in our society, which I think we all are very grateful for, quite frankly, because we really believe it could help advance a lot of really critical conversations. And that keeps me up at night, afraid that we may miss this opportunity, that we may let this opportunity pass somehow and not fully take advantage of it. And one of the ones that keeps me awake all the time anyway, and is one of those things that I'm hoping we can advance in addition to diversifying the leadership at the city level, at the state level, at the national level, so that it's much more representative, is this whole issue of climate change that at Boston Harbor now we work on every day. I mean, that is, once we deal with COVID, there is still this climate issue, which is really a much greater crisis and a much greater threat to our public health and to our economy. So that's a big one. But then in the day-to-day, it's making payroll, right? We've all probably tried to make commitments to our staffs and to keeping our organizations whole, and to making sure that people stay gainfully employed through this really difficult time to any extent that we can. And so that's the day-to-day, near and dear, kind of in the minutia at the other end of the spectrum. It's making sure that I can keep everybody whole.
Thank you. And what keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night is the next national election, and it scares me. And it scares me that if we don't get out the vote of people like us and make sure that we have a new president, all of these things will be lost. And so, and I, the more dramatic part is, I do worry about the survival of our democracy. But I think there never has been in our lifetime such a critical election and such a critical need to make sure that we maximize the vote of people who share our values and our vision for this country.
Thank you. Keeps me up at night too. I have to be honest. And Quincy, what keeps you up at night?
Well, one of the things is, and you'll all appreciate being on a Zoom, because my robot vacuum cleaner just started running. So you got to bear with me as I pause it here. It's not my kids, it's this thing that helps me. So sorry about the background noise there. I think the thing. Well, my normal answer is nothing really keeps me up at night, because I'm always grounded in the fact that, as tough as things can be, as hard as it may be, for me, there's a million people that have it worse than what I do. And again, that sort of comes from growing up poor, a single parent household. But I'll tell you the thing that it doesn't keep it doesn't keep me up at night, because it's always on my mind. It worries me all the time. And there's a question here, and I'll tell you the biggest thing that I worry about, and I worried about this before COVID, and I think it's even more, is really the future of work. McKinsey did a whole study around how technology is changing and evolving the work that so many do. And particularly for minorities who are disproportionately in roles that can be displaced because of technology, that is a major concern that I have. And we talked a little bit earlier about how education can change that. I also think there are things that, that organizations that need to come together. So it's not just colleges. I'm hopeful community colleges see a resurgence in being able to support people in a much affordable way to be able to rechange and reskill themselves. I think nonprofits coming together to be able to support that are going to be key things. But I'll tell you, that's what keeps me up at night. It keeps me up at night is, one of the questions that was on here is about, people losing their jobs in the retail and the service industry. And again, that's, a real thing that we are going to be dealing with, not only because of technology, but because of what this COVID impact has had. So that's the things that I worry about. But I think there's going to be ways that, as I read that question, I thought to myself, less people are going to come to our branches than ever before. That was already on pace to happen. And that's going to mean, less bankers in our branches. But I'll tell you, one of the things that I didn't see coming, our call centers overwhelmed. And there's a lot of call centers that are overwhelmed. So yes, there'll be technology there and chatbots, but these are things that people just want to talk to people about. And so, we're talking about hiring temps and shifting work from frontline to back office. And, as Kathy talked about, re-envisioning, maybe people aren't flying into the Massachusetts, but there's a heck of a lot of people here that probably haven't taken advantage of many of those things. I think, that's the way as individuals we have to think about work opportunities as we look to the future.
I think we should open it up to see if there are people who have questions, and we can always go back to. So if there are people who have questions and you're in the, did you go into the Q&A? And I am going to, I don't know if Arnold, you might have heard, if you were here when that question was answered, Arnold Sepinter was asking what roles can public, private, and nonprofit organizations play in preparing people who may lose their jobs. And I think maybe Quincy might have answered that, or service industry jobs in the near, for new jobs in the future. So I don't know if Quincy, you felt you have answered that?
I mean, from my perspective, yeah, I think it's really going to be about reskilling and then looking to, as in my example of the call center, what are places that you may not have thought of before that are actually going to be busier now in the future than they were in the past. And I'm not sure if, if anyone else has an opinion, but that was sort of my context on it.
One of the other question is, what is the process of getting a mentor? And this is from Raven James, and she boldly said, I am interested in Evelyn being my mentor.
It's done. Okay, Colette will give you my email address and let's get connected.
Okay. Someone asked to Evelyn Murphy, how would you advise Biden in his campaign strategy in light of the seismic changes caused by COVID-19 in the area of fundraising, rallies to unify the party, and ways to galvanize groups of all races? This is Raymond Yu.
Whoa. Well, it would be sort of presumptuous to advise the vice president right now, but in some ways, I think in the last couple of days, I've watched the shift in what he's doing. It's no longer talking about going back to, the values of the past. It's about what this new future is going to be all about. And I think that's critical. He has got to carve out a picture, a vision of what we want in America going forward and make that compelling case. He's got to get out of his basement, and he's got, whether he can figure out how to do Zoom conferences or whatever the technology is going to be to deal with large crowds. That's part of the technical support staff that I don't think he's quite got a handle on yet. But, and I also think that his choice for the vice presidential running mate is going to be particularly important. I was one of the 20 women who went out to advise Fritz Mondale in 1984 about choosing a woman for the ticket. And we all made these we went around the room. I mean, this was the 4th of July. We're all sitting there. Fritz Mondale sits down at this table, and 19 of us, myself included, make these very data-driven, serious, policy wonkish responses and advice to this the former vice president, and about what he should do and why it's important to select a woman. Bella Abzug, the former congresswoman from New York, instead says at the very end, Fritz, she says, we all know your wonderful record on women, so let's not bother with that. Give us a picture, and that picture will tell the country what's possible for women. And a week later, he chooses Jerry Ferraro, and that announcement has a magic to it. I was in the Channel 5 news studio. I watched the most hardened, seasoned newscasters and the cameramen stop. Literally, the place got silent, look up at the monitor, and just get overwhelmed with this picture of opportunity. I think Joe Biden has to do the same thing. And by the way, and then the lesson of that is that they didn't vet Jerry Ferraro's husband. And so the Vice President Biden needs to be very careful on vetting and thorough on that, because that can stop any momentum. But he has to give us a picture of the future, given his age, and a future for America. I happen to be biased and believe that ought to be a woman of color. Because the Black community is responsible for Joe Biden getting this nomination, but also because that picture of the future of America is more diverse, and it is important to do that. So to me, it's an important measure for him to be able to say, it's not only here are my policies, but here's the picture of the future. And that to me is a compelling case for Joe Biden.
I am with you, and I have my Black woman. Yes. The next question is for Quincy, and this comes from Loretta Kagler, who is asking, what role should financial institution, or could they play, given the fact that we are now starting to think about reopening in terms of supporting small and minority businesses to really have some stability. So Quincy, you might want to talk about some of the things that Eastern Bank has done and is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that, Colette. And I know, again, one of a little bit more detail on that question was sort of really around, it seems like sort of starting businesses as well, because there's been a barrier to funding for minority businesses in the past. So first, I'll sort of talk, there is understanding the ecosystems, probably the first thing. So I'll sort of talk and work its way up, because I think banks on whole do a less than perfect job in supporting startup businesses. And part of that reason is because by nature, banks are borrowing the money from their depositors and they're lending it out to other customers with the idea of returning that money. So banks by nature are conservative, and they only want to lend out money when they know they're going to get the money back. Startups inherently have a much higher risk. And that's why there's been a whole ecosystem that's been built around particularly startups. Now, again, we can sort of talk a little bit about, in general, support of minority businesses and coming outside of the startup world, and the systemic racism that you've seen in lending historically, et cetera. And I could talk a little bit about that. But I really think there's sort of two aspects of this. Are you a startup or are you an established business? And I think with the startup, it's about understanding the network that's out there. And there is a network from, Seed, who's in the Southeast, Mass Growth Capital, Axion, organizations like the Lawrence Partnership, Mill City Community Investments, where we've made investments in, who's a CDFI, the Foundation for Business Equity, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. But those other organizations really focus on the really small businesses who have an idea, they have a dream, and it gives them a way to be able to get their dreams started. And then again, you talked about ICIC earlier and what they do. So there's sort of an ecosystem out there to support it on that end. I think there's another, again, the aspect that banks play is really making sure that we're serving our communities. And, Eastern's been I'm proud to say we've been the largest SBA lender for over 10 years. SBA is designed to be able to help businesses who wouldn't be able to qualify for a traditional loan by themselves. Either they don't have the right capital or they don't have the right collateral often. And that's what you find with minority businesses a lot of times, is they don't have the capital to invest in their business. And so we've been able to leverage the SBA really in that partnership to support small businesses. But that's still not enough. 3 years ago, we made a $10 million commitment. We've grown it since then and form the Foundation for Business Equity, an organization focused on really building an ecosystem, first and foremost around Black and Latino businesses. And it's been exclusively focused on that, but that ecosystem has expanded to include the Boston Foundation and the Growth Fund that they run. Jim Rooney at the Chamber has started the Pacesetters program, which is getting large businesses in and around Boston committed to supplier diversity and helping to support those small businesses, breaking up these major contracts and bringing in people of color to be able to support their spend. But it's also from a philanthropic perspective. And again, this is where organizations, I think banks have to continue to do more in support of the CDFIs. For example, Berkshire with Malia Lazoo has really done great stuff in coming into Boston and stepping up in communities of color. They've invested in Mill Cities, which again is another community development financial institution. They're a CDFI to help doing microloans in communities that need it. We've been an investor there. And so we're looking to be able to spread that word, and the work that Glenn Lloyd is doing with the Foundation for Business Equity that's really focused on Black and Latino businesses. That's been primarily focused on larger Black and Latino businesses with 800,000 in revenue and higher. And people ask why, and our answer has been because those businesses create a lot of jobs and they need just as much support as the smaller businesses. But they're also looking to expand, and with the COVID work that they've been doing, they've been working to support businesses much smaller size, with $100,000 in revenue and more, with technical assistance, and also bringing in like BECMA, a Commonwealth Kitchen, others within the community. So I know that's a long-winded answer, Colette, because it's a complex problem and it really depends on your size, your geography, but really it's understanding the ecosystem and then getting partners that are committed to equality in business as well.
Okay, someone asked about they talked about, I think, I don't have a question, but just wanted to say to you, Colette, for assembling such a distinguished group of mentors and for all that you do. This is Demetrius Russell. Thank you, Demetrius. And someone talked about miseducation, now credit scores, prison records, and other societal barriers affect people of color disproportionately. It seems that banks could do more. Would Eastern lead the sponsorship of a grant or low interest loan for entrepreneurship and microloans for not-for-profits, etc., like Bank of America has done for NACA, for home ownership?
Yeah, again, this is, in terms of supporting grants, it's what we do. I mean, we are one of the most philanthropic organizations in all of Boston, over $10 million to thousands of organizations. Just with COVID, as soon as this happened, we put together a $5 million small business loan fund. We put together a $2 million consumer loan fund. We've donated over $7 million now. We started with 3. We just added another $5 million to COVID relief. And so we are blessed to be able to have a very strong foundation. And while all foundations are struggling, given the stock market and things that are happening, the way that we look at it is, this is the reason this foundation was committed, was because of moments like this. And so we'll continue to lean in there. Please let me know about, the program that you're running. We're more than happy to be able to look at that type of support. But like I said, we have others coming along in that path. You talked about some of the work that Bank of America is doing. My good friend Roxanne Cook, who's over leading Chase and their initiative here in Boston, Malia at Berkshire, and again, there's countless of others. This industry is finally getting it, and so I'm proud to see the work that we'll begin to do.
One more question, and then we are going to close out. This is from Leverett Wing, and he's asking for his son. He says, who happens to be listening. He said, each of you have had a number of careers, company or professional transformations. What skills and or areas of knowledge inside and outside of school would you point to that has helped you the most during times of change and uncertainty?
I'll jump in. This is Kath. I think it's not just in times of uncertainty, it's always, but I think the number one set of skills has been people skills. It has, because none of us have done anything that we've done alone. It's all been about identifying issues that need to be addressed and then identifying that team of people that are best suited to help you address them. And the more you move around or the higher up you get, the more you realize how dependent you are on assembling teams who are really great at what they do and can help you achieve. You may, I think those of us in the CEO role and have been in various CEO roles, there's the ability to vision, there's the ability to be strategic. But at the end of the day, it's having that emotional intelligence, that humility, and that belief in the importance of all of the knowledge and skills that other people that you need and that you bring to the table. And then recognizing that at the end of the day, you work for them and that you are empowering them. You're helping them to grow and develop and work together to achieve whatever it is you're all trying to achieve.
So let me build on what Kathy's just said, because I agree completely with how she's framed it, and only add that to me, in my career, it's been up and down. Colette may say it's been successful, but I've been thrown out of office several times, and so what I've learned out of this is exactly what Kathy said. It's about people, and my next moves have always been around people whom I trust and whom I know I could learn from, particularly coming up and sort of early in my career. And that made me jump from one sector to another. But it was always on the judgment of who are the people who are going to be around me, whom I will have to rely on, and who can help me learn more about whatever this issue is. So I think the people skills are right on. I mean, this is not so much, and it's also, as Quincy said earlier, it's the discipline of hard work and the dedication of doing it. But if you combine those two things, that pretty much is the ballgame.
So, I'll just continue this theme in terms of constant learning and learning from the people that you work with. I'm just going to connect it to one other thing through my career, which was different opportunities to learn about yourself as well, and then working together with people. So I had the opportunity to do a system called Myers-Briggs early in my career and understand my own personality style. And I've done it multiple times, and it's never changed from day one. And I am a complete introvert. And as I learned, and I'm an ISTJ for those of you who have done Myers-Briggs. So I used to joke that I was like Dr. Spock from Star Trek. Everything had to be logical. But what I learned through that process was there are strengths and weaknesses about my own personality style that I had to learn how to get. I had to learn how to be uncomfortable with myself so that I could become and develop the skills that I needed to be able to grow. And I learned that from working with other people, because I wouldn't see it a lot of times. You know, I've had multiple managers, as I said earlier, who I would ask them, like, what do I need to get better at? Because, you know, again, it wasn't that I thought that I knew everything. I knew I didn't, but I also didn't know what I didn't know. And that idea of constant learning. And the last thing I'll say, you know, I was an executive at Citizens, and I remember we got a new boss that ran the whole, you know, division. Wasn't a CEO, but one step down. And he said to me, he's like, why are you still asking me about what things you can do to get better at? Like, no one at your level asked that question. And my response was, because there's things I need to continue to do better. And, you know, that really connected me with him. And he really helped me to learn a lot about things that I just didn't have strengths and weakness, you know, I didn't have the strength around. And so that's just what I would connect that constant learning to as well.
Thank you, Quincy, and thank you, Evelyn and Kathy. You guys have been just amazing. The comments in our comment folder, it has been off the charts. And everyone, thank you, Raul, for your comments. Quincy, he said that your nuggets of as a guy in his career, man of color, that it really resonates for him. So he wants to thank you for that. And for Evelyn and Kathy, thank you so much for taking the time. And I know that there are lots of other things you could be doing, like sitting down, watching the news, or, you know, talking to other people on Zoom. But you have, for the last 4 years, all three of you have done this. And we are so grateful. We are enriched for it. And I want to thank you. I see Liz Chang. Liz has been on all of these, the last 3. This is her 3rd, and she is a big supporter of Get Connected. And actually, they are going to they have sponsored and will be hosting the 50 most influential people of color in higher education, which we are hoping we can do in September. I am hoping that we can still gather and celebrate, even if we did half on Zoom and half in studio. We are looking forward to that. And we have next week, next Tuesday, we have Mary Jo Meisner. And I think we have, I'm trying to think who is with me. Oh, Lee Pelton, the president of Emerson College, my alma mater. And the next day, we are doing something on small business, which Loretta, you might want to be on. We have Bob Rivers, we have Daryl Settles, we have Betty Francisco, and we have Natalia Uberti, who is from the executive director of small business for the city of Boston. And they're going to talk about small business and what we can be doing to really elevate and ensure that businesses survive, that they survive this COVID. So please spread the word. We are looking forward to seeing you. And thank you all for joining in this and for being such a great audience. And we look forward to continuing. And Quincy, please thank you so much, Eastern Bank, for not only being a founding sponsor, but for always being there to really elevate the conversation when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm going to invite everybody to now, if we could sing happy birthday to Evelyn Murphy. So,
Colette.
Let's sing happy birthday for her. Okay, guys, happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Evelyn. Happy
birthday
to you.
I'm charmed and touched.
Thank
You
you.
know.
That was the
And
most
thank you, Colette, for your leadership, as always.
Yeah,
absolute.
thank you, Colette.
Agreed. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Yes, Colette. Thank
It's been
you.
fun.
I always feel blessed. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Stay
Bye-bye.
safe. Bye.